begin with FBI agent Peter Strzok, who has been the target of President Trump's tweets and Republicans' conspiracies about the Russia probe, which is intended to protect our national security. Testifying on Capitol Hill yesterday, he gave over 9 hours of testimony, grilled again and again and again about the text messages that got him removed from special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation and written up in an inspector general's report. From the very outset, committee Republicans threatened him with contempt for not providing more details about the investigation of Trump's campaign's suspected ties to Russia.
Between July 31st and August 8th, how many interviews did you conduct related to the alleged collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign?
So, Congressman, as you know, counsel for the FBI, based on the special counsel's equities, has instructed me not to answer questions about the ongoing investigation.
I'm asking for a number.
Russian attempts to interfere.
Agent Strzok.
I will not, based on direction of the FBI to me, based on that, I will not answer that question, because it goes to matters which are related to the ongoing investigations being undertaken by the special counsel's office.
Mr. Strzok, you have not stated a valid legal basis for not responding to a question directed to you by a member of the United States House of Representatives. I am specifically directing you to answer the question in response to our subpoena, notwithstanding your objection.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Strzok, please be advised that you can either comply with the committee's directive to answer the question or refuse to do so, the latter of which will place you at risk of a contempt citation and potential criminal liability.
Point of order.
Do you understand that?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
The question is directed to the witness.
And I have a point of order before he answers the question.
The point of order is not well taken until...
You don't know what the point of order is. You can't say it's not well taken.
The point of order, the witness will answer the question.
Mr. Chairman, I raise my point of order, and I insist on it.
What is the point of order?
The United States Attorney's Manual instructs department personnel not to respond to questions about the existence of an ongoing investigation or comment on its nature or progress, pursuant to FBI policy, which is necessary so as not to allow us to subvert an ongoing criminal investigation. He is right.
It wasn't the discovery of your text, Mr. Strzok. It was the existence of your bias that got you kicked off.
I'm stating to you, it is not my understanding that he kicked me off because of any bias, that it was done based on the appearance. If you want to represent what you said accurately, I'm happy to answer that question, but I don't appreciate what was originally said being changed.
I don't give a damn what you appreciate, Agent Strzok. I don't appreciate having an FBI agent with an unprecedented level of animus working on 2 major investigations during 2016.
I think it's important when you look at those texts that you understand the context in which they were made and the things that were going on across America. In terms of the text that we will stop it, you need to understand that that was written late at night, off the cuff, and it was in response to a series of events that included then-candidate Trump insulting the immigrant family of a fallen war hero. And my presumption, based on that horrible, disgusting behavior, that the American population would not elect somebody demonstrating that behavior to be president of the United States. It was in no way, unequivocally, any suggestion that me, the FBI, would take any action whatsoever to improperly impact the electoral process for any candidate. So I take great offense and I take great disagreement to your assertion of what that was or wasn't. As to the 100 million to 1, that was clearly a statement made in jest and using hyperbole. I, of course, recognize that millions of Americans were likely to vote for candidate Trump. I acknowledge that is absolutely their right. That is what makes our democracy such a vibrant process that it is. But to suggest somehow that we can parse down the words of shorthand textual conversations like there's some contract for a car is simply not consistent with my or most people's use of text messaging. I can assure you, Mr. Chairman, at no time in any of these texts did those personal beliefs ever enter into the realm of any action I took. Furthermore, This isn't just me sitting here telling you, you don't have to take my word for it. At every step, at every investigative decision, there are multiple layers of people above me, the assistant director, executive assistant director, deputy director, and director of the FBI, and multiple layers of people below me, section chiefs, supervisors, unit chiefs, case agents, and analysts, all of whom were involved in all of these decisions. They would not tolerate any improper behavior in me any more than I would tolerate it in them. That is who we are as the FBI. And the suggestion that I, in some dark chamber somewhere in the FBI, would somehow cast aside all of these procedures, all of these safeguards, and somehow be able to do this is astounding to me. It simply couldn't happen. And the proposition that that is going on, that it might occur anywhere in the FBI, deeply corrodes what the FBI is in American society, the effectiveness of their mission, and it is deeply destructive.
Matt Miller, Jeremy Bash. So we had this patriot articulating beautifully what was driving him throughout this process and the mistakes he made throughout the way. And then the Republicans, at times, it was a circus. You had a dentist struggling to find words, saying that he was reading his body language. You had little Matt Gaetz trying to play an attorney, doing some sort of legal rundown and stumbling through that. Jeremy, I'll start with you, and then Matt, follow up. What struck you about Strzok's testimony?
Yeah, I think he did a good job, Mika, at times actually explaining the mission and the professionalism of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, something that's kind of been lost in all of this partisan din. I think reasonable minds can differ as to whether his text messages demonstrated an impermissible bias. But look, here are the facts. Bob Mueller removed him from the investigation more than a year ago. He is not involved in the investigation, has not been for a very long time. And nothing that happened yesterday actually erases the fact that the Mueller investigation has resulted in 5 criminal convictions, 20 indictments, people sitting in jail or facing jail at this hour because of concerns over their close connection to the Russian Federation and them not representing the truth when asked about it by the FBI. And so nothing that happened yesterday in this kind of epic nonsense of a partisan circus actually erases the fact that Bob Mueller is conducting a principled, professional investigation.
Matt.
You know, I think the behavior of the members of that committee was an absolute disgrace yesterday, and this is from a couple of committees who are not, you know, known for being packed with statesmen. And I think that last clip that you showed from Peter Strzok is a moment that will go down in history. You know, almost like, you know, the moment when Joseph Welch said, "Have you no shame?" to the members of the McCarthy committee, when someone who has seen his name dragged through the mud came up and explained to the committee and to the American people just what was happening and just what the effect was on trust in the FBI and the FBI's ability to do its mission. I agree with Jeremy. There are legitimate questions about Agent Strzok's texts and what he said in those texts, but the problem with what the members of Congress were doing, they were never able to connect his beliefs about Donald Trump with his actions, with what he did as an FBI agent. And there's a logical fallacy at the heart of this entire conspiracy theory, and that is, as he pointed out in his testimony, he was one of the few people in America that knew in the fall of 2016 that Donald Trump's campaign was under investigation for collusion with the Russian government. He could have, with one phone call to any reporter in America, probably ended Donald Trump's campaign and ensured that he wasn't elected president. He didn't do that. It's hard to make a case that he was a part of a big conspiracy to keep Donald Trump from becoming president when he didn't take advantage of that opportunity.
Well, you know, I can't believe that body language was being brought up here as something that was important to look at, but I can't really read body language, but I can read faces, and I can hear when someone is struggling for words because they feel like they're striking out. The Republicans seemed like they were striking out, Heidi, again and again, not getting what they wanted. And this went on for 9 hours. Like, what did they think they were going to get?
I'm a reporter, which means I look for facts.
Okay.
And I, at the end of
Not
this, tried to think about what new did I learn here, other than what I knew at the very beginning, which is that Peter Strzok sent some mean texts about Trump, and he did it on his professional device instead of his personal device. We learned nothing new other than that. And make no mistake, the Republicans said over and over again they were only questioning Strzok. This wasn't a reflection on the FBI, but it was, because the FBI's Inspector General found that those texts and Peter Strzok's personal feelings had no impact on the investigation.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it's hard to know what we learned.
It was a long, long day.
While Strzok sat through 9 hours of testimony, Republican House members tried and failed to trigger a reaction. Take a look.
In front of you have one sheet of paper that was presented to you a few minutes ago, and I'm going to just go to a date and then ask you to read your own words. On October 20th, 2016.
I can't pull away and I defer to the chairman whether
you can
or not
just
he'd
use
like me to
one
use
letter if you
profanity.
don't mind.
What the F happened to our country, Lise?
Okay, read it again that way.
Sir, did you not, was it
I
not
just wanted to
intelligible?
hear it
You
one
just
more
want to
time.
hear it for me to repeat it?
Please.
Okay, sir. Sure. Happy to indulge you.
By the way, I'm a dentist. Okay, so I read body language very, very well. And I watched your comment and actions with Mr. Gowdy. You got very angry in regards to the Gold Star father. That shows me that it's innately a part of you and a bias.
Sir, I disagree. I don't know if you're saying this experience is like being at the dentist, if that's what you're suggesting.
Okay, so let me
I would tell you, sir, what you see in my response is a genuine passion for the United States of America.
What this man has done.
The gentleman from Texas will suspend for a moment.
There is the disgrace. And it won't be recaptured anytime soon because of the damage you've done to the justice system. And I've talked to FBI agents around the country. You've embarrassed them. You've embarrassed yourself. And I can't help but wonder when I see you looking there with a little smirk, how many times did you look so innocent into your wife's eye and lie to her about Lisa?
Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous.
The credibility of a witness is always an issue.
Mr. Chair, please.
Mr. Chairman, this is intolerable harassment of the witness.
What's wrong with that? You need your medication.
I think he does, honestly, because who's embarrassing who at this point? You know, some shows really chop things up, and so you only get, little soundbite here and there. We let things breathe, and the Republicans are just, at this point, it has been very difficult to watch because you see them really grasping here to insult this man, to shake him down, to find something more beyond the texts, and to overly focus on him and his text to the point where they don't hear him saying that he cares about this country, that he cares about what's happening to this country as it pertains to Russia. He cares about our national security. That's what he was trying to say, and people are reading body language. Alex, your dad's a dentist. Bring up Alex. So is that what he does?
My dad's a dentist. He's a pediatric dentist.
Oh, is he good at body language?
In no way does being a dentist make you an expert as a body language. It just doesn't.
Mika, I was watching for about 4 hours yesterday. I don't have much of a life.
Yeah.
And I was screaming. I was screaming at the television. You know, the Democrats, every time we came to a Democrat, they would get up and say, we're having this meeting, this meeting here, yet we can't get a committee meeting on anything after kids are killed by guns in schools. We can't get a committee meeting when kids are being ripped from their parents' arms, but we can get a committee meeting over these texts. Shame on these pathetic Republicans. That's an FBI agent who basically also in his text disparaged Hillary Clinton, who also disparaged Bernie Sanders. And by the way, every judge, every FBI agent, every police officer, every congressman, has a bias. It doesn't mean they bring it to their job.
Every human being has an opinion, including reporters.
Everybody votes. So every single person in public office has
America.
Yes. But that doesn't mean they can't do their job.
I know.
And this is a man that's dedicated. These little dweebs sitting there, the discourse, the way they present themselves, Trey Gowdy, the way he says, I don't care what you have to say. It is...
Trey Gowdy of the 2.5-year Benghazi investigation saying, I'm concerned about investigations being partisan. Trey Gowdy, seriously, talking out of both sides of his mouth. If anybody is being partisan and taking sides and running to his corner, it's that little guy right there.
One of these guys referred to Bob Mueller as Bob Mueller. I can't even pronounce the guy's name. I cannot wait till Mr. Mueller's report comes out. Mm-hmm. And once again, we're 20 indictments now.
I'm looking forward to it.
We'll wonder if that gets up to 40 and 60.
Yeah.
And if we can come back and any of these congressmen could say, oh, I guess the reason those happened is because Mr. Strzok sent a text to a friend of hers. That's the reason those indictments. They should be ashamed of themselves. And I do believe if anybody watches this They will understand why there will be this blue wave, because people are just fed up with these pathetic, sniveling little cowards.
But I sat behind Hillary Clinton for Benghazi in that hearing. This felt like a repeat of Benghazi. Actually, a lot of the same players, except it was the FBI sitting in that seat. And that's why when Peter Strzok was finally given his moment to speak freely, he said, this exercise comes at a cost. And it comes at a cost of eventually eroding the underpinnings of law and order in this country when you are teaching a whole new generation to distrust the top law enforcement agency.
But I would say this. In a sense, it was a public service. First of all, it was an opportunity for Agent Strzok to rehabilitate his reputation after almost a year of smears. Secondly, it was a reminder, just watching the congressman, that there's a reason Republicans are called the stupid party. My old colleague at the Wall Street Journal, Holman Jenkins, used to say that there's certain ideas that vanish in the presence of thought. The idea that there was a bias at the FBI toward Hillary Clinton is simply refuted by the fact that the FBI was the one agency of government which played a decisive role in getting Donald Trump elected. And furthermore, our friend on this show, Dan Senor, tweeted about a year ago that as late as March or February or March of 2016, a certain Indiana governor was saying to him that Donald Trump must not be allowed to become the nominee of the Republican Party. So if Vice President Pence is allowed to have that bias up until March of 2016, why is Agent Strzok not allowed to have it up until the summer of that year? I can name dozens of prominent Republicans and people, including people who then are now serving in this administration, who felt exactly as Agent Strzok did throughout the 2016 election. Maybe they should step down from office and have, instead of failing to have his
Ted Cruz,
all right,
Marco
so
Rubio, and the rest.
I want to bring it to David Ignatius to really wrap up what he thinks happened yesterday and what he thinks the outcome of this was. I will read a tweet. Steve Schmidt was live tweeting, former Republican. Oh, my gosh. He says this, that was an oversight, and you know it. It was harassment, conspiracy theories, whack jobbery, dishonesty, demagoguery, wrapped in a blanket of banality and not. This country needs statesmen and women. You know one well. Think about stepping it up. He seemed... Oh, I can honestly say that after watching Trey Gowdy today for the first time in my 47 years, I can honestly say, thank God I'm bald. Okay, so we all started to lose our mind watching this because it just seemed like if you were trying to create and produce a show where you could set up a villain, I was not just confused who the villain was, it was very clear who the hero was by the end of the 9 hours of pounding this guy. David.
Well, it was a snapshot of political life in 2018, and it was really a depressing one. We are a long way from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and Jimmy Stewart, and we don't live in that world anymore. I thought Peter Strzok did himself some good. Those emails, naked, read, are pretty damning, and he explained them in a coherent way. I thought Peter Strzok did the FBI some good. He just sounded like an FBI guy, spoke with such passion about what the Bureau is and does. And I thought the Republicans on the committee just turned this into a show trial and did more to discredit the GOP effort to undermine Mueller's investigation than any event that we've seen. I think that's really my takeaway from yesterday. This long show trial like grilling leaves the Republican argument that this is all political and outrageous a lot weaker than it was. So that's, we'll see where they go from here. But I think most people looking into that would have just shaken their heads and said, "Oh, I don't know. It doesn't sound right. What Trey Gowdy's saying doesn't sound right to me."
Still ahead on Morning Joe. Actually, I want to grab Katty Kay. I know we're going to talk to you about what happened in London, but do you have any reflections from watching these hearings?
You've had two incidents this week where you wonder what is going through the minds of Vladimir Putin as he watches what's going on here in the United States and at the NATO summit in Europe. And in both cases, whether it is intentional or not, the person or the country that benefits from the disintegration of that intelligence committee, and as Mr. Strzok said it himself yesterday, is Moscow. And watching what was going on and the exposure of those divisions in the committee and the partisanship of those members on the committee, you can't help but think, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but America at the moment is handing Moscow own goals, whether it's President Trump in NATO or the members in that chamber yesterday.
Yeah, and trying to get him to speak specifically about investigations that impact our national security. And by the way, he was on 2 major investigations, one on Hillary Clinton, which he made very clear he was as aggressive, and the other, of course, candidate Trump. So if you watched, you felt like you were watching an American hero being brought down, which is that what we do? I didn't know that. Up next, these are the latest pictures out of the UK, where President Trump and Prime Minister Theresa May are set to hold a joint news conference just a short time from now. It comes just hours after the president cut the legs out from his counterpart in an interview with the British press. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.